Perhaps growing up as a child, you had dreams of treasure hunting, right, for pirate treasure. Last week, I got to live out a childhood dream of mine vicariously through my nieces and nephews. I was on vacation with my family. It was the first time we've all been together since I was ordained in 2018 with my parents, my 3 brothers, my sister, my in-laws, a family friend, and my 5 nieces and nephews. You might be wondering where I am. I missed the family photo because I was napping. That's not a joke. Anyway, my brother Joseph, he designed a treasure hunt for my nieces and nephews. That included a weathered treasure map, required the use of a compass, right, to head north, south, east, and west. It consisted of a series of clues, one leading to the other. Take, for example, clue number 3, which said, take 30 paces east to the pirate lantern between the king's tool shed and the queen's outhouse. Just don't get too close to the outhouse, you know. Believe me when I say you definitely do not want to be digging for buried treasure near the outhouse, okay? Anyway, the clues led them all around my parents, their cottage property in the forest and up hills and into valleys and in pursuit of the pirate treasure until the little scallywags, right, they finally arrived to the infamous pirate haven, Unicorn Island, where they discovered that the treasure was not in fact buried, it was sunken at the bottom of the lake. And so they hauled it up by a rope and they opened up the treasure chest to find the pirate booty, about 80 pounds of candy. Now, I personally contribute to helping the kids by eating about 40 pounds of it myself. And all these little kids running around eating candy. There were tantrums and meltdowns, and one of them just broke down screaming and crying at the top of their lungs until my mom finally said, "That's enough. Go to your room, Father Alex." Right? Anyway, we had a blast. It was a lot of fun. Now, as a child, perhaps you once dreamed of searching for pirate treasure. Although not much changes as we become adults, the object of our quest changes from what's imaginary, though, to what is real. We search for real-life treasures. We perhaps dream of being rich, the millionaire lifestyle, and we pursue more money, more things, more clothes, more treasure. We get caught up in the treasure hunt of life for the dogged pursuit of more. But while a children's treasure hunt might bring great joy, the adult pursuit of treasure doesn't actually make us happy. And yet we see it wherever we look. We have a societal sickness. Call it affluenza. It's defined this way: as a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste resulting from the dogged pursuit of more. It's an apt description, I would say. This is the definition given to affluenza by a professor of ethics, Clive Hamilton, and Australian economist Richard Dennis. They wrote a book called Affluenza: When Too Much Is Never Enough. And they pose a provocative question. If the economy has been doing so well for so long, why are we not becoming happier? Well, it's because we never seem to have enough. The insatiable desire in the human heart directed towards material things, it will never satisfy. And the consequences of it all? Well, Hamilton and Dennis, they say, affluenza causes overconsumption, luxury fever, consumer debt, overwork, waste, and harm to the environment. These pressures lead to psychological disorders, alienation, and distress, causing people to self-medicate with mood-altering drugs and excessive alcohol consumption. Affluenza is a sickness, and those are some of its symptoms. Now, in Christianity, we have a different word for this, for affluenza, with a far more ancient pedigree. We call it greed. Oops, too soon. We call it greed. Now, we tend to think of greed as something that exists in the exclusive domain of the rich, right? Wall Street bankers and, the Elon Musks of the world. But the reality is that greed strikes far more closely to home. And now, I do tend to agree that it is largely a problem for the rich. But here's the thing. You are rich. And you might be thinking, no, whoa, wait, what do you mean by that? Well, here's the truth. That if you live in a Western democratic market society, you are part of the richest 1% of human beings who have ever walked this earth. Just take, for example, 200 years ago, the average income, the wealth of the average person has increased from 200 years ago to today by over 20 times. After you've adjusted for inflation and cost of living. We are 20 times richer, every one of us, than we were 200 years ago. And yet, it hasn't made us happier. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus warns us about greed and its effects. And today, for example, we heard him say, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." One's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Whenever life becomes about seeking or increasing the number of possessions that we have, consumption, acquisition, it robs us of our peace and our capacity for happiness. So if the sin of greed is actually making us miserable, if it's robbing us of our happiness, how do we guard against it, like Jesus tells us to? Well, in the gospel, Jesus tells a parable about the rich fool. He explains a farmer who's very successful in acquiring a large sum of wealth says to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store all my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grains and goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.'" Now, honestly, that sounds to me like the average retirement savings plan, right? Work until I get to the point where I can buy a timeshare in Florida for 6 months, right? Spend my week golfing, relaxing, taking it easy. But here's the thing. The farmer is greedy not because he's wealthy. He's greedy not because he's wealthy, but because of the way he relates to his wealth. Because of the way he relates to what he has. If you notice, if you were listening very clearly, you'll have heard him say the word "my" 5 times in 3 sentences. My crops, my barns, my grains, my goods, my soul, my, oh my. That's a lot of my's. Now, here's the truth. Here's what he thinks. He thinks that everything he has belongs to him. That is his. And that's the lie that he believes. See, the truth is nothing that this man owns belongs to him. It all belongs to God. They're God's crops, God's barns, God's grains, God's goods, God's soul. It's God's house, God's car, God's paycheck, God's RRSPs, it's God's iPhone. It all belongs to God. All of it. We don't even belong to ourselves. All of it is God's. See, the truth about greed is that it's a lie. So, how can we guard against greed the way Jesus tells us to? Well, the first thing is that it always begins with conversion, or repentance, or metanoia. Those are three words that mean essentially the same thing. A change of mind that leads to a change of lifestyle, or a change of the way we think that leads to a change of action. And so the first start is with metanoia, by reorienting ourselves towards the truth so that we can live in that truth. Now, this is something that should probably be done daily, even, by acknowledging that everything I am and everything I have comes from God. That I didn't earn it, I don't deserve it, but it is a pure gift from His hands. And I don't know about you, but this is something I find that I have to do every day, because if I don't, I begin to forget. I begin to forget. And perhaps you've never even thought about that before, and you've never said that. And it might even seem a little bit scary to say, Lord, everything I have is yours, it belongs to you, and you can do with it whatever you want. Now, it takes courage to say that. But all it is acknowledging the truth about who we are and about where we've come from. Now, when we embrace the truth that nothing we have actually belongs to us, it begins to free us to live differently. So the next thing we can do to guard against greed is to begin to live differently, to live with two other G words: gratitude and generosity. See, gratitude and generosity, these are two qualities, I think, of the citizens of heaven. Now, we're in our first week of this new preaching series called Citizens of Heaven, where we'll be talking about what does it mean. Paul, in the scriptures, he tells us to live as though you are citizens of heaven. That we're called to live in a way that is differently from the people who live in this world, that this world is not our homeland. And so we'll be talking about what that means and what that looks like over the next number of weeks. So maybe you're here today and you're struggling with the symptoms of affluenza. Perhaps you're anxious about your present or future financial situation. Perhaps you feel acutely the things that you do not have, that you see that others have and you don't. Perhaps you're overworked, in debt, burnt out, in the dogged pursuit of more. Well, I want you to know that God sees your affliction. He sees you, and He's compassionate for you, and that's not what He wants for you. That your life does not consist in the abundance of possessions, in the never-ending and insatiable quest for more. You see, in this life, we get a choice. We get a choice. We get to live like the man in the parable, the rich fool, and take our greed to the grave. Or we can live with gratitude and generosity like the citizens of heaven who live for the things that are eternal and never pass away. Now, right at the end of the gospel, Jesus tells us to be rich toward God. To get rich toward God. I think that's a good way of summarizing what we've talked about. I think it means that in part we need to receive everything as a gift from the hands of God and then begin to practice generosity and gratitude. So if you struggle with the symptoms of affluenza, start with repentance, conversion. Lord, I'm sorry for living and possessing the things in my life as though they belong to me. It's all yours. I give it all to you. Do whatever you want with it. And give me the grace to be thankful for what I've been given and to be generous with what you've given me. And if you want to start practicing generosity today, I'll even let you buy me 40 pounds of candy. I do it for you. I do it for you because I love you. Just kidding. Don't do that. I just had a dentist appointment and they filled a cavity, so I don't need more candy. But generosity and gratitude, they take practice. They're a daily habit that we need to cultivate. And so perhaps for you, the question is, how can you cultivate those two practices every day? Now, I want to tell you a story that highlights generosity and gratitude. It comes to us from, they're called the Desert Mothers and Fathers, which it was a monastic movement of men and women into the desert in the first century who wanted to live radically the gospel. And so this story highlights generosity and gratitude. Once there was a brother who brought a bunch of grapes to the monk Macarius. Now Macarius, for love of others, thought not about his own things, but about the things of others. So he carried that bunch of grapes to another brother who seemed more feeble. Now the feeble man gave thanks to God for the kindness of his brother. But he too, thinking more of his neighbor than himself, brought it to another, and again, the other brought it to another. So that same bunch of grapes was carried around all the cells where the monks lived, far across the desert, and with no one knowing who first had sent it, the bunch of grapes was at last brought to the very first giver. You see, these monks, they were citizens of heaven. They weren't living for the things of this world. They were rich toward God. It was gratitude that allowed that feeble, sickly monk to receive the grapes as a gift from God and to be so generously pass it on to the next, which led to this unbroken chain of generosity and brought it full circle to the one who first started giving. The one who gives always receives. So the antidote for us in this world of affluenza, the antidotes for greed are generosity and gratitude. Now, all the latest cognitive neuroscience and sociological studies, they tell us something that we've been teaching for the last 2,000 years, that all the happiest people are the most generous people and the ones who are most thankful, who practice generosity and gratitude. See, the happiest people live each day without the anxious thoughts and exhaustion of affluenza, but with a deep, abiding peace that flows from a profound trust in the providence of God. The happiest people don't feel jealous or insecure about what they don't have and about what they see other people receiving, but they're able to rejoice at the gifts that God has given them and the people around them. The happiest people spend more time thinking about how to give away what they have than they do about increasing what they've been given. The happiest people live not for the things of this world that pass away, but for the things that are eternal. The happiest people are rich towards God, and they are citizens of heaven.